Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to today's Caffeine for the Soul. If you enjoy the things I talk about each week in this podcast, I encourage you to check out my site at michaelneill.org, and in particular, sign up for the basic course in Living from the Inside Out, and you'll find all the links and info on our homepage. So today's podcast is part one of a two-parter, and in today's part, I want to introduce a concept from a book called Don't Believe Everything You Think, which is a phrase I've used in my books, and I don't actually know where the phrase originates, but it is one of my favorite phrases, because we do have this tendency to assume that just because we have a thought in our heads, it's our thought and it's meaningful, and it turns out that most of the stuff that passes through our head isn't really worth giving the time of day to. The distinction the author makes that I wanted to talk about is the distinction between thoughts and thinking. The author, Joseph Wynn, what he talks about is he says, well, there's sort of two uses of the mind. And by the way, this is what I took from it. It may or may not be exactly what he said or intended. And one way that we use our mind is we think about things, and we think and we think and we think. And it's a very active process, even if it's going on in the back of our minds, and there's something very continual and logical and scrunchy faced, and it's like we try and work things out with our brains. And then there's this other thing that happens, which is we have thoughts. Like a thought comes into our head, and if we like the thought, that's nice, and we can do something with it. And if we don't like the thought, there'll be another one along in a minute. Now, what the author suggests is that all of our suffering is a product of thinking, not thoughts. Now, a way that I've talked about that distinction in the past is that we don't suffer from the content of our thinking. We suffer from the fact that we think, and we're not always aware that we're thinking. Another thing I talk about a lot in my work is that we're living in the feeling of our thinking, not the feeling of our circumstances. And I know that one of the ways that people sometimes hear that is, oh, so I need to think about better things so that I can have a better feeling. But if you've actually tried that, you probably notice that it's got a limited shelf life. Like, you can try to get yourself to think about things in a positive way, or think about positive things. Think a happy thought, think a happy thought. And you kind of know that even if it works for a little while, at some point it flips back to, And what I want to suggest is that the reason that for that is not your lack of ability to think positive thoughts over time. It's that the very act of continually thinking exhausts us, weighs us down. It's got a heaviness to it. It's almost like our consciousness gets squashed by the sheer weight of thinking and overthinking that we do. But the reason that, even though most people will go, yeah, I overthink, yeah, I get busy-minded, yeah, I can see how that is problematic or limits my effectiveness or makes me a bit miserable or anxious or depressed, the alternative sounds like not thinking at all. And that sounds like a terrible idea, because if I never thought, my entire life would fall apart and it would be a mess. What I like about distinguishing thinking, which is an activity, from thoughts, which are just things that pop up in our minds when we make space, is that allowing thoughts takes no energy or effort at all. While you've been listening to me, chances are you've had some thoughts pop up in your head. And if they've been helpful, I hope you enjoyed them and allowed them to help you. And if they weren't, you probably didn't find it a big deal to come back to listening to me instead of noticing the thoughts. But it's also possible that what you've been doing is thinking, And if you've been thinking, you probably haven't heard half of what I've said, and either need to go back and replay bits like hit the 15 seconds back, 15 seconds back, 15 seconds back, or you just kind of give up on it and go, well, maybe something went in. Now, what I want to suggest is that allowing thoughts to come to mind is the way our mind is designed to be used. Now, in part 2 of this particular set of episodes, I'm going to share how you can put this distinction to use. Until then, have fun, learn heaps, and happy exploring. Bye-bye for now.